My child, I need you to hear my voice right now, above every other voice that has been speaking over you. Because there is something happening in your life that I have watched unfold, with a grief that I want you to understand is real, and a justice that I want you to understand is already in motion. What was done to you was not done in the dark. What was said about you was not said in a room I could not enter. What was planned against you, under the cover of holy language and Sunday morning perfume and the warm handshake of someone who called you brother and sister, that did not escape my attention for a single breath. I saw the face they showed you at the altar, and I saw the face they showed when they thought I was not watching. And I want you to know, before I tell you everything else, before I open up what is about to happen to the person who has been wearing a mask in my house, I want you to know this first. I am not confused about who hurt you. I know exactly who it was. Type amen if you believe God sees what happens behind closed doors. There is a particular kind of wound that does not have a name in most conversations. A wound that people who have never experienced it cannot fully understand from the outside. And that is the wound of being betrayed inside a sacred space. When the world hurts you, when someone in an ordinary environment turns against you, there is pain in that, real pain. But there is also a framework for understanding it. The world is the world. People in the world act according to the world. You grieve it, you guard yourself, you keep moving. But when the betrayal comes from inside the walls of a place you believed was set apart, a place you walked into expecting the presence of something higher, a place where you lowered your guard because you believed that shared faith meant shared character. When the knife comes from that direction, the wound goes deeper than the injury itself. Because it does not just take something from you, it takes something from the space where you went to be restored. And that is the wound you are carrying, not just the wound of what was said or done. The wound of where it came from, the wound of who it came from. Someone who lifted their hands in worship and then used those hands to work against you. Someone who quoted scripture and then used that same scripture as a weapon, framing what they said about you in language borrowed from holiness, while the intention underneath was anything but. Someone who asked to pray with you and perhaps did pray with their mouth, while their heart was already circling what they knew about you and how they could use it, who to tell it to, how to frame it, how to make it sound like concern when it was nothing more than information being passed to the wrong people in the wrong direction. I want to speak plainly about what they did, because I think you have been too careful about naming it, too hesitant to call it what it was, because it happened inside a church, and there is an unspoken rule in communities of faith that says you should not speak too harshly about what happens among believers. But I make no such rule. I am the one who built the standard of holiness, and I am the one who sees most clearly when it has been violated. And what was done to you was a violation. Wearing my name while working against someone I love is not a minor thing. Using the language of prayer and fellowship and community as cover for gossip, manipulation, and deliberate damage to another person's reputation and peace, that is not a small offense that I overlook, because it occurred in a building dedicated to me. It is a more serious offense because of where it occurred. I see the difference between someone who fails and knows they have failed, and someone who performs holiness while living something entirely different. I see the difference between imperfection and masquerade, and what has been happening around you has been a masquerade, a performance so rehearsed and so practiced that from a distance it looked genuine, but I do not see from a distance. I see from the center, and from the center what I have seen has been deeply clear. To type yes, Lord, if you know God is not fooled by religious performance. Let me tell you what it looked like from where I stood, because I want you to understand that I was present. in every moment of this. I was there on Sunday morning when that person greeted you with warmth, when they spoke your name with a smile that felt real, when they offered the embrace of a fellow believer, and you received it as exactly what it appeared to be, because you have an honest heart, and you extended that heart to someone who was not meeting you honestly. I was there when the words left their mouth in the sanctuary, and when different words left their mouth in the parking lot, and in the midweek text messages, and in the quiet conversation at someone else's kitchen table, where your name was spoken without your presence and without your permission. I was there when they dressed their words in spiritual clothing, when they said they were only sharing because they were worried, because they were concerned, because they felt led to mention it, because they believed the body needed to know, when what was actually happening had nothing to do with care and everything to do with control and comparison, and the kind of smallness that cannot tolerate someone else carrying favor without trying to find a way to reduce it. I was there for all of it, and the person who did it does not know what to do with the fact that I was there. Because part of what makes a performance possible is the belief that the one who would judge it cannot see behind the performance. But I have always seen behind it. From the very first time they decided to let what they knew about you travel further than it should have, I was already there, already watching, already making note, already arranging what would come next. What comes next is not what they were expecting. Type justice if you trust that God balances every scale. There is something I want you to understand about the person who did this to you. Not to make you feel pity for them in a way that minimizes what they did, but to give you a clarity about what has been driving their behavior that I think will help you stop carrying the confusion they left inside you. Because when someone hurts you in the name of faith, when someone uses the cover of a sacred community to do something that sacred community would condemn if they saw it plainly, you are often left with a kind of internal dissonance that is hard to settle. You wonder how someone who seems so sincere in their worship can behave so differently when the service ends. You wonder whether the faith is real at all, whether everything you witnessed was false, whether you can trust your own perception of anyone anymore. I want to answer that confusion directly. What drives someone to perform holiness while living something contradictory is not the absence of belief. It is the presence of a wound in them that has never been brought into full honesty. They believe, but they have made a private agreement to keep certain parts of themselves outside the reach of what they believe, to let their faith govern their Sunday presentation and their weekday reputation, while allowing something else entirely to govern how they treat the people they perceive as threats or competitors or reminders of something they do not want to face about themselves. You became a target, not because of what you did wrong, but because of what you represent to something in them that they have refused to surrender. Your favor, your growth, your genuine relationship with me, your ease in the very space where they work so hard to perform. Something about your presence revealed something about the gap between who they are and who they have been presenting themselves to be. And rather than allow that gap to be addressed, they chose to focus their attention on reducing you. That is not strength. That is the deepest kind of weakness, and it will not protect them from what is forming. Type I need this if this is bringing you clarity about what happened. Now, I want to tell you what is happening in that community right now, in the spaces around the person who put on the mask, because I need you to understand that the stage they have been performing on is beginning to shift beneath them in ways they cannot control. I have allowed certain things to remain covered for a season, not because I endorsed what they were doing, but because the full exposure, the kind that lands with clarity and cannot be argued away, requires a specific kind of timing. Premature exposure gives people the ability to redirect the story. They can reframe, they can explain, they can perform contrition and settle back into the same patterns once the moment passes. I do not want that for the person who hurt you, not out of cruelty, but because incomplete accountability serves no one and changes nothing. What I have been waiting for is the kind of accumulation that makes the picture undeniable. And it has been accumulating. The small moments where what they claimed in public did not align with what they demonstrated in private have been noticed, not loudly, not in a way that became a conversation, but quietly, in the minds of people who are paying more attention than they have let on. The inconsistencies between their public warmth and the quiet damage they have caused have been creating a residue in the perception of the people around them. And I have been watching that residue build because it is the foundation for what is about to become clear. There are people in that community who have begun to ask questions they have not yet voiced. There are conversations that are forming between people who trusted the person who hurt you and are now, slowly and without fully understanding why, beginning to revise that trust. There are moments approaching in which what was done in private will have no choice but to become visible in the ordinary course of community life, not through a dramatic confrontation, not through an announcement, but through the kind of natural revealing that happens when someone has been operating in secrecy, and the space for secrecy begins to close. I am closing that space. I have been closing it carefully, and what has been used against you in the dark is about to find itself standing in a light it did not choose and cannot control. And your name, the reputation that was handled carelessly by someone who had no authority to carry it, is going to be returned to you in a condition that is better than they left it. Because when the truth of what was done becomes visible, the people who witnessed it will understand not just what you were subjected to, but who you were while it was happening. How you did not retaliate. How you did not descend to their level. How you continued to show up with integrity in the very space where you were being treated without it. That is going to matter to the people who are watching, and more of them have been watching than either of you knew. Type vindication if you believe God will make your name clean. My child, I want to speak now to the injury that has not fully surfaced yet. The injury that lives underneath the anger and the confusion and the question of why. And that injury is the grief. Because what you lost was not just your standing in one person's estimation or even in a community's estimation. What you lost was a version of a place that felt safe. Before this happened, you had a space where you could put down the weight that the rest of the week placed on you. A space where you brought your real struggles to real people who you believed were holding them carefully. A space where the language of prayer and worship and shared belief felt like a shelter, felt like a place where the rules were different and the people were different, and the ordinary cruelties of ordinary life were supposed to be left outside. That space was compromised by someone who was supposed to protect it and instead exploited it. That grief is real. The loss of a sanctuary is not a small thing, and I am not asking you to pretend that nothing was damaged. Something was damaged. But I want to tell you what was not damaged, what cannot be damaged, regardless of what any person inside any community chooses to do with the space I have created. Your relationship with me was not damaged. The prayers you lifted in that building, the worship that came from the real interior of who you are, the genuine seeking that brought you through those doors in the first place, none of that was diminished by someone else's hypocrisy. Your faith did not become false because someone else's performance was. Your experience of my presence was not cancelled by someone else's pretense. I was real in those moments even when the person next to you was not, and I am real now. speaking directly into the pain of what they did, and telling you that the sacred thing you were reaching for has not been taken from you. What was taken was a false version of community that was always going to reveal itself eventually. And though the revealing was painful, the alternative, remaining inside a space where you were being slowly and quietly damaged by someone whose damage was invisible to you, was worse. I allowed the mask to come off because the mask was still doing harm even while it was in place. Exposure, even painful exposure, is better than the continued operation of something false against someone I am committed to protecting. If this word is speaking to the part of you that needed to hear from heaven today, I want to invite you to consider sowing a seed of faith into this ministry by buying a coffee at Ko-fi. Core 1111 Daily Blessings. What you give with a generous heart, I return with an open hand, and your act of faith in this moment is seen and recorded. Now let me continue to speak over your life. Type I. Trust you if you still believe God's house is worth returning to. Now I want to say something about the question that I know has been living quietly in your mind. And that is whether what was done to you has any implication for how much I trust you. Whether the fact that it happened inside the walls of a community of faith means something about your standing with me. Whether the whispers that reached the wrong ears have somehow found their way to my ear as well, and changed what I know about you, or think about you, or intend for you. I want to answer that directly and without hesitation, no. What was said about you did not change what I know. What was spread did not alter what I see. What was framed as concern about your character was received by me as exactly what it was, which is noise generated by someone whose own character could not tolerate your proximity to favor. I did not shift my view of you based on the testimony of someone who was performing their faith for an audience while dismantling yours in private. I do not evaluate my children through the lens of their accusers. I evaluate you through the lens of what I built inside you, and what I built inside you is still there, intact, unaltered, undiminished by what was done, unaffected by what was said. You are not less in my sight because someone in a church chose to make you less in the sight of others. You are not set back in any record that matters because someone used sacred language to move against you. The only record that will ultimately have any bearing on the fullness of your life is the one I keep. And in that record you are seen accurately, which means you are seen with grace. And you are seen with the full knowledge of everything you have been through, and everything you have carried, and everything you have continued to do right, even in a season that gave you every reason to stop. Type amen if you know you are seen and covered by God. Let me tell you what happens to the one who used my house as a hiding place for their hypocrisy. And I want to speak about this clearly because I think you need to hear it. Not because you have been obsessing over their punishment. I actually know that part of your pain has been the fact that you have not wanted to wish harm on someone in your faith community, have not wanted to be the kind of person who calls down consequences on another believer, have been caught between what was done to you and your own values about how to respond to it. That tension in you is not weakness. That tension is the result of having actual integrity, of caring about what kind of person you are, even when the person who hurt you has not cared about the same thing. But I want you to release yourself from the burden of protecting the person who hurt you from their own consequences. Justice is not your responsibility to administer, and it is not your job to shield anyone from it. What is happening to that person is happening because of choices they made, consequences they set in motion, and a trajectory they chose to be on. I am not punishing them beyond what is warranted. I am simply allowing the weight of what they have sown to land where it was always going to land once the season of its harvest arrived. What is landing is the slow but total unraveling of the credibility they built while using my name as a costume. The people they built that credibility with are beginning to see it differently. Not all at once, not loudly, but in the quiet way that trust erodes when the pattern of someone's behavior begins to tell a story that conflicts with their public presentation. They are beginning to be known for something other than what they intended to be known for. The image they carefully constructed is developing cracks that they cannot patch from the inside, because the cracks are coming from the truth pressing outward, and truth, when I am behind it, finds its way through every surface eventually. What they built on your name will not continue to support them. What they borrowed from your character, the credibility they gained by association with a community where you were known and valued, is being withdrawn in ways they cannot trace back to a single moment, but will feel as a sustained and irreversible shift. The rooms that were open are becoming less open. The conversations that included them with warmth are becoming more careful. The favor that felt like it was building is encountering resistance that has no clear source, but is entirely real. I am the source. And what I have withheld, because I am a God who protects the ones who belong to me, even when the protection comes in forms that look, from the outside, like ordinary changes in circumstance. Ordinary changes in circumstance are becoming something they cannot recover, inside a narrative they have been telling about themselves. For you, what has felt like ordinary difficulty is about to become something you cannot explain except by faith, which is the kind of explanation I prefer. Type favor if you believe your season of blessing is beginning now. I want to close this by speaking to what is ahead of you, because the community you have been part of is not the only community I have for you, and the relationships you have carried in that space are not the full measure of what fellowship and genuine belonging are going to look like in your life. There are people I have prepared for you who will not smile on Sunday and curse on Monday. There are people who do not know how to perform faith, because what they have is not a performance. It lives in them the same way it lives in you, in the real interior, not the curated exterior. Those people are coming, some of them are already near, and the clearing that has happened in your life, the painful but necessary removal of what was false, is what has created the space for what is real to come in. You may feel that what happened has made you more guarded, less willing to open yourself inside a community of faith, less likely to trust that the warmth you encounter in sacred spaces is genuine. I understand that. I am not asking you to be naive. I am asking you to let me carry the discernment that determines who is safe and who is not. Because your heart, left to its own reading, has been hurt by this, and may now read some people as unsafe, who are actually the ones I have sent. Let me be the one to guide you toward what is real, and away from what is performing. Let me reopen your heart at the pace that is right for you, not so slowly that you remain closed to what is coming, and not so quickly that you walk into another space that has not been prepared for you. What was done to you inside those walls was real, and the grief of it is valid. But those walls do not define what is available to you in the larger space of a life that I am still actively, intentionally, and precisely overseeing. One person's hypocrisy is not the final word on what faith communities can be. One mask is not the face of everyone who worships. One betrayal, as deep as it went, is not the blueprint for every relationship that will be built inside a space of shared belief. I have more for you than what that person was able to offer, and more than what they were able to damage. They smiled on Sunday and worked against you in the dark. I have seen both, and I have moved accordingly. What was done in the dark is becoming light. What was whispered in private is becoming visible. What was used against you is becoming the thing that reveals them. And in the revealing, the clearer a picture of who you actually are becomes available to the people around you, because honesty is most visible when it is standing next to its opposite. You were honest, you were real. You showed up with an open heart in a space that should have been safe, and you trusted the wrong person with the right heart. And that combination, the rightness of your heart and the wrongness of their stewardship, will become undeniable when the full story is able to be seen. My child, you came to my house looking for me, and I was there. I am always there. Not in the performance, not in the Sunday costume, not in the language borrowed from holiness to do unholy things, but in the real seeking, in the honest prayer, in the genuinely broken heart that shows up wanting to be known and wanting to grow. I was there with you in every one of those moments, and I received every one of those moments. And nothing that was done by a person in that building has changed what passed between us in the honest moments of your worship and your seeking and your crying out. That was real, that was received. And that is the foundation that nothing and no one can take from you. Not the one who smiled and cursed, not the gossip that traveled further than it should have, not the community that perhaps saw less than they should have seen, not the wound that has been sitting in you since you realized what was being done. You are not less. You are not abandoned. You are not forsaken in the very house where you expected to find cover. You were covered the entire time by the one whose house it actually is, which is not the person who built the building or leads the service or holds the title, but by me, who sees the interior of every person who walks through the doors and knows the difference between coming to worship and coming to perform, and who knows, without question, without confusion, and without the influence of anything that was said against you, exactly who you are and exactly how much you are loved. Dwent this. Let it be enough for today. And know that what is unfolding on your behalf is already in motion, already arranged, already timed, and already certain. Type I reek this if this message has found you at the right moment, because my child, I do not send words to the wrong address. You are exactly who I was speaking to when I prepared this, and you are exactly who I will continue to speak for. When the season of full restoration opens and everything that was taken in secret is returned in full view, I see you. I always have.